The morning of December 5th, 1944, Lucherberg, Germany. Sergeant George Burns stood in the doorway of a shattered concrete building, watching his breath crystallize in the freezing air. Behind him, what remained of 2nd Platoon, Company F, huddled against walls still warm from artillery fire. They had taken the village at dawn, held it through the afternoon. Now, as pale winter light broke across the Rhineland, they were about to lose it. The sound came first. Not the familiar rattle of machine guns or the whistle of incoming mortars, but something deeper, a mechanical growl that made the broken concrete vibrate beneath Burns's boots. Then the explosions started. Direct fire, methodical, systematic. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. An ammunition truck in the village square erupted in flames, its cargo cooking off in a cascade of secondary blasts that sent smoke billowing across the rubble. When the smoke cleared, Burns saw it. 60 tons of German engineering sitting less than 100 yards away. The turret hatch stood open, a German tank commander shouting orders over the thunder of the 88mm main gun. The Tiger had broken through the American defensive line, destroyed the anti-tank guns, and was now systematically dismantling everything that stood between German forces and recapturing Lucherberg. Burns had a rifle, 30 rounds of 30-06 ammunition. Against a tank with frontal armor thick enough to bounce American tank destroyer shells at point-blank range, he might as well have been throwing rocks. This is the story of how American infantry learned to fight the Wehrmacht's most feared weapon with a tube, a rocket, and tactics that military doctrine said were suicidal. It's about the engineers who designed a weapon that couldn't defeat heavy armor, the soldiers who used it anyway, and the brutal mathematical reality that turned tank hunting into a calculated form of murder where the hunter was just as likely to die as his prey. The bazooka existed because American ordnance engineers in 1942 faced an impossible problem. German tanks were getting heavier, their armor was getting thicker, and American infantry had exactly one anti-tank weapon, a rifle grenade that couldn't penetrate anything more substantial than a Panzer III. The M10-shaped charge grenade could defeat 60mm of armor, but at 3.5 pounds, it was too heavy to throw and too unwieldy to launch from a rifle. It sat in warehouses, effective in theory, useless in practice. Lieutenant Edward Uhl was walking past a scrap pile at Aberdeen Proving Ground when he saw a steel tube, 5 feet long, roughly 2.5 inches in diameter. He picked it up, held it like a rifle, and had the kind of idea that changes wars. Put the grenade on a rocket. Put the rocket in the tube. Fire it from your shoulder. The recoilless design meant all the exhaust went backward, and the shaped charge meant you didn't need to throw a heavy projectile at high velocity. You just needed to get it there. The first test firing happened in May 1942. They aimed at a moving tank at Aberdeen. The crude launcher, with sights literally bent from a coat hanger that morning, scored multiple hits while 5 different spigot mortars, the weapon everyone thought would be the future of infantry anti-tank warfare, managed exactly 0. Major General Barnes watched the demonstration and remarked that it looked like Bob Burns' bazooka, the tubular novelty instrument the comedian played on radio. The name stuck. By November 1942, M1 bazookas were shipping to units deploying for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. The weapon was revolutionary. For the first time in modern warfare, a 2-man infantry team could engage armor at ranges beyond hand grenade distance. The rocket-propelled M6 warhead used a shaped charge design, focusing explosive force into a superheated jet of metal that could burn through armor plate. On paper, it could penetrate 3 inches of rolled homogeneous armor, enough to defeat any tank's side armor. Maybe enough to knock out a Panzer IV from the flank. The problem revealed itself the moment American forces encountered German heavy armor in Tunisia. The shaped charge worked, but only when it hit at the right angle, at the right spot, against armor thin enough for the penetration depth. German tank crews learned quickly. They started welding spare track links and sandbags onto their vehicles, disrupting the shaped charge's jet before it could reach the actual armor. They added Schürzen, armoured skirts that hung several inches away from the hull, detonating bazooka rounds before they could touch the tank itself. And then there was the Tiger. The Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger I entered production in August 1942, and by spring 1943, Allied intelligence officers were collecting reports that didn't make sense, tanks that shrugged off multiple anti-tank gun hits, armour that bounced 75mm shells, a main gun that could kill Allied tanks from 2,000 yards while remaining completely invulnerable to return fire. The Tiger's frontal armour measured 100mm thick on the hull, 110mm on the turret face. Its sides ran 80mm on the turret and superstructure, 60mm on the lower hull. For context, the M1 Bazooka could penetrate, under perfect conditions, roughly 76mm of armour. The M9 Bazooka, introduced in late 1943 with an improved rocket, could manage maybe 100mm. The mathematics were brutal. A frontal shot was impossible. The M6 and M6A3 rockets would detonate against armour too thick to penetrate, accomplishing nothing except revealing the bazooka team's position. A side shot might work, but only if the round hit perpendicular to the armour surface. Any angle beyond 30 degrees and the shaped charge would glance off or fail to penetrate fully. The rear armour was thinner, more vulnerable. But getting behind a 60-ton tank actively trying to kill you required either suicidal courage or tactical genius. American doctrine for bazooka employment reflected this reality. Field Manual 23-5, published in February 1943, was explicit. The bazooka was a defensive weapon. Its purpose was not to hunt tanks offensively, but to be used as a last resort to prevent tanks from overrunning infantry positions. Maximum effective range, 300 yards. Recommended engagement range, 100 yards or less. Against heavy armour, the manual suggested aiming for tracks, vision ports, or waiting until the tank exposed its thinner rear armour while climbing an obstacle. General George Patton, writing to a colleague in May 1944, put it more bluntly. The purpose of the bazooka is not to hunt tanks offensively, but to be used as a last resort in keeping tanks from overrunning infantry. To ensure this, the range should be held to around 30 yards. 30 yards, that's 90 feet. Close enough to see the rivets in the armour. Close enough to hear the tank commander's voice inside the turret. Close enough that if you missed, or if the rocket failed to penetrate, or if the tank had infantry support, you were going to die. But doctrine was written in offices by men analysing capability charts and armour penetration tables. Combat was fought in villages and forests by men who watched tigers roll through their positions, destroying everything, and who had exactly one weapon that might, possibly, under the right circumstances, stop it. The first documented case of a bazooka destroying a Tiger I happened during the Sicily campaign in July 1943. An M1A1 team from the 1st Infantry Division engaged a Tiger that had become separated from its supporting infantry while moving through an olive grove near Gela. The engagement lasted perhaps 30 seconds. The bazooka team waited until the Tiger stopped to navigate around a stone wall, exposing its thinner side armour at close range. The gunner fired from approximately 50 yards. The rocket struck the driver's vision port, an armoured glass block set into the frontal hull. By extraordinary chance, the shaped charge penetrated the relatively thin armour around the port's frame, and the jet of superheated metal entered the crew compartment. The Tiger caught fire. The crew abandoned the vehicle. This single engagement taught several lessons that would ripple through American infantry tactics for the rest of the war. First, Tigers could be killed with bazookas, but only by exploiting specific weak points. Second, the tank had to be stationary or moving slowly enough for accurate aim. Third, the bazooka team needed to be close, hidden, and willing to hold fire until the perfect moment. And fourth, you got exactly one chance. The backblast from the M1A1 bazooka created a signature 6 feet long and clearly visible to anyone within several hundred yards. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Fire once, and every German within line of sight knew exactly where you were. The weapons limitations forced tactical innovation. Bazooka teams started working in pairs, not for fire support but for positioning. One team would engage from the front or side, drawing the tank's attention. The second team would maneuver to attack from the flank or rear while the tank was distracted. This worked maybe half the time. The other half, both teams died. Infantry learned to use terrain differently. A bazooka team needed three things: concealment, a covered approach route, and an escape path. Villages became death traps for Tigers not because American bazookas could defeat them in open combat, but because narrow streets and ruined buildings provided concealment until the tank was close enough for a side or rear shot. Tank commanders learned to avoid built-up areas. Infantry learned to force them into exactly those situations. The most effective tactic, and the most dangerous, was simple patience. A bazooka team would take position in a building or behind cover along a known tank route. They would let the tank pass, wait for it to move 30, 40, 50 yards beyond their position, then engage from behind, targeting the thinner rear armor, the engine deck, or the ventilators that provided air to the engine compartment. The superheated jet from a shaped charge could ignite fuel, set off ammunition, or disable the engine. Even if it didn't kill the crew, a mobility kill was often enough. A stopped tank was a dead tank, but this required discipline that contradicted every human instinct. You had to let a Tiger roll past your position, its main gun searching for targets, its machine guns capable of shredding your concealment. You had to trust that it wouldn't see you, that it wouldn't fire, that you could get the shot off before the supporting infantry spotted you. Most men couldn't do it. Their nerve broke. They fired too early, from too far away, at too poor an angle. The rocket bounced off or failed to penetrate, and then they died. George Burns could do it. By December 1944, the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves, had been in combat for 6 weeks. They had fought across Holland and into Germany, taking casualties in every village, every forest, every frozen field. Burns, a sergeant in Company F, 415th Infantry Regiment, had already earned a reputation as someone who didn't rattle. When things went bad, when the situation demanded someone walk into fire, Burns volunteered. He wasn't exceptional because of physical prowess or tactical genius. He was exceptional because he could do simple mathematics in his head while under fire and reach conclusions other men avoided. If the Tiger was going to kill everyone in the building, then someone had to stop the Tiger. If the only weapon available was a bazooka, then someone had to use the bazooka. If using the bazooka meant standing in the open at 30 yards from a tank actively shooting at infantry, then that's what you did. The mathematics were simple. The execution was terrifying. The morning of December 5th, Burns watched the Tiger methodically destroy his platoon's position. It had already knocked out the anti-tank defense, shattered the company command post, and was delivering direct fire into buildings where wounded men were taking shelter. The platoon's bazookas had been destroyed in the initial assault. No one knew where the ammunition was. The situation was deteriorating from critical to catastrophic. Burns left the building. He made his way through the village square, moving through smoke and rubble, while the Tiger continued firing. He found a tank destroyer, an M10, buttoned up with its crew inside. He pounded on the hatches, shouting for help. The crew, understandably, declined to open up while a Tiger was delivering direct fire across the square. Their response, as Burns would later recount, was succinct. "Go to hell." Burns unstrapped a bazooka from the tank destroyer's external storage. He grabbed ammunition. A soldier appeared, a man whose name Burns never learned. The man said if Burns had the courage to go after the tank, he would help reload. They moved through the ruins toward the Tiger. The technical challenge was simple to state, impossible to execute. The Tiger's frontal armor was invulnerable. Side shots might work at the right angle. The rear armor, particularly around the engine compartment, was vulnerable. The engine ventilator, a large armored grille that provided cooling air to the Maybach HL 230P engine, was a known weak point. Hit it correctly, and the shaped charge could penetrate into the engine bay, igniting fuel lines or damaging critical components. To hit it, you needed to be behind the tank, which meant getting behind 60 tons of mobile armor actively engaged in combat operations without being seen by the tank's crew, the supporting German infantry, or the machine gunner positioned on top of the turret. Burns and his anonymous loader maneuvered through the buildings, using rubble for cover, timing their movement to the rhythm of the Tiger's main gun. They got within 50 feet. Burns fired twice. Both rockets missed. The shaped charge requires precise aim. At close range, even a slight error means the rocket passes over or beside the target. The miss revealed their position. The Tiger's turret began to traverse. 88mm main gun swinging toward the building where they were sheltering. Burns stepped into the street. Point-blank range, 20 feet. He aimed at the German soldier directing fire from the open turret hatch. The M6A3 rocket flew true. It struck the soldier, passed through him, and detonated against the tank's turret exterior. The soldier died instantly. The detonation, while not penetrating the turret armor, convinced the remaining crew that the interior might be compromised. The tank moved. This was the critical moment. The Tiger began withdrawing, turning north, German infantry running alongside for protection. It was moving, but slowly, presenting its engine deck. Burns reloaded, stepped into the open again, fired from 20 feet at the engine ventilator. The rocket penetrated. The shaped charge jet burned through the armored grille, through the engine deck armor, into the compartment where the Maybach V12 ran at 1500 RPM, generating 650 horsepower. Fuel lines ruptured. The engine caught fire. Smoke poured from the ventilator. The Tiger kept moving, now trailing flames, crew shouting, but the fire was spreading. 50 yards up the street, the crew abandoned the vehicle. Burns killed them with rifle fire as they fled the burning tank. 1 Tiger, 10 bazooka rounds fired, 8 German infantry killed, 1 tank destroyed. Burns received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for combat valor. The citation read, "Sergeant Burns' courageous actions, far above and beyond the ordinary call of duty, exemplify the highest traditions of the military forces of the United States." 4 months later, on April 2nd, 1945, Burns did it again. Company F was advancing on a German-held town when Burns spotted the tank first. It was positioned to cover the main approach, its 88mm gun commanding the roadway. The company was going to walk directly into its kill zone. Burns didn't wait for orders. He didn't wait for the anti-tank platoon. He told his platoon leader he would handle it, grabbed a bazooka and ammunition, and moved forward alone. The engagement lasted perhaps 3 minutes. Burns used buildings for cover, maneuvered to within effective range, and fired 3 rounds. The first 2 forced the tank to button up, the crew closing all hatches against the perceived threat. The 3rd round hit true. Major General Terry Allen, commander of the 104th Infantry Division, personally pinned the gold bar of a second lieutenant on Burns's shoulder. The sergeant who fought Tigers with a tube and rockets was now an officer. But Burns's story, extraordinary as it was, represented only the most visible edge of a broader tactical evolution happening across every theatre where American infantry encountered heavy German armor. The mathematical reality of Bazooka versus Tiger engagements remained brutally unforgiving. The Tiger I weighed 60 tons in combat configuration. Its Maybach HL 230P engine produced 650 horsepower, giving it a power-to-weight ratio of roughly 10.8 horsepower per ton. This meant the tank could reach speeds of 23 miles per hour on roads, maybe 12 cross-country. It wasn't nimble, but it was mobile enough to maneuver, to reposition, to keep its Heaviest armor facing threats. The crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, who also served as hull machine gunner. They sat inside armor that at its thickest measured 4.3 inches, behind vision blocks that limited their view to narrow slits, relying on the commander's ability to spot threats before they became lethal. This created opportunities. A tank with limited visibility couldn't see infantry approaching from dead angles. A commander focused on one threat might miss another. But exploiting these opportunities required getting close enough that a single burst of machine gun fire would kill you. The Tiger's main armament, the 8.8 cm KBUK-36, was originally an anti-aircraft gun adapted for anti-tank use. It could penetrate 4 inches of armor at 2,000 yards. Its high explosive rounds could demolish buildings, destroy field fortifications, and kill infantry at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire. The coaxial MG-34 machine gun and the hull-mounted MG-34 provided anti-personnel protection. In theory, a well-commanded Tiger with infantry support was nearly invulnerable to bazooka teams. In practice, combat broke theory like artillery broke buildings. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 demonstrated this perfectly. The engagement pitted the 4th Armoured Division against elements of the 5th Panzer Army, including newly formed panzer brigades equipped with Panther tanks. The German attack came in fog, which negated American artillery support and air superiority, but also negated the superior range of German tank guns. Visibility dropped to less than 200 yards. Tanks engaged at point-blank range. Infantry became critical. Major Charles Carpenter was a liaison pilot flying a Piper L-4 Grasshopper, a high-wing observation aircraft powered by a 65-horsepower engine. The L-4 weighed barely 1,100 pounds, empty, carried minimal fuel, and had a top speed of 85 miles per hour. Carpenter looked at this aircraft, designed for artillery spotting and reconnaissance, and decided it needed armament. He mounted 3 M9 bazookas on each wing strut, 6 launchers total, wired to an electrical firing switch in the cockpit. The modified aircraft, which his crew named Rosie the Rocketer, could barely fly with a full load of rockets. The weight and drag reduced performance significantly, but it could fly high enough to avoid ground fire, maneuver above German armor, and attack from an angle that no tank was designed to defend against, directly above. The technical challenge was significant. A bazooka fired from the ground launched its rocket horizontally, relying on the shaped charge to penetrate perpendicular to the armor surface. Fired from an aircraft diving at angle, the rocket's trajectory became more complex. The shaped charge's effectiveness depended on angle of impact. Too steep an angle, and the jet would disperse before penetrating. Carpenter had to dive at approximately 30 degrees, release the rockets from roughly 200 feet altitude, and pull out before ground fire could track him. On September 20th, 1944, German Panther tanks attacked 4th Armoured Division positions near Aracourt. Fog covered the battlefield. American forces were pinned down. Carpenter took off alone, flying below the fog layer, searching for targets. He found them. German armor advancing in column formation, confident that weather had grounded Allied aircraft. Carpenter dove, released 6 rockets, climbed back into the fog, landed, reloaded, and repeated the attack twice more that afternoon. 16 rockets fired total. Ground forces later confirmed hits on multiple German vehicles, including 2 Panthers verified as destroyed or immobilized. More importantly, Carpenter's attacks broke the German formation's cohesion. Tank commanders, suddenly facing fire from above, began maneuvering defensively, breaking their attack coordination. The 4th Armoured Division used this confusion to reposition and counterattack. Carpenter's final tally by war's end would include 6 confirmed tank kills, including 2 Tiger IS, plus numerous armoured cars and trucks destroyed or damaged. His innovation, mounting bazookas on light aircraft to attack thin top armour, represented the kind of tactical creativity that doctrine manuals couldn't predict but combat necessity demanded. The top armour on a Tiger I measured only 1.0 to 1.6 inches thick on the hull roof, 1 inch on the turret top. This was sufficient to protect against artillery fragments and small arms fire from ground level, but completely inadequate against shaped charges attacking from above. Carpenter demonstrated that the bazooka's limitation wasn't the weapon itself, but the firing position. Change the geometry, attack from an unexpected angle, and suddenly the invulnerable became vulnerable. But most infantry didn't have aircraft. They had mud, rubble, and darkness. They learned to exploit all three. Night operations became preferred for bazooka teams hunting heavy armor. German tanks typically lagged at night, crews exhausted, security focused on preventing infantry infiltration rather than anti-tank threats. A two-man bazooka team could approach within effective range, sometimes as close as 50 yards, before being detected. The muzzle flash from the rocket launch would reveal their position, but by then the round was already in flight, and the team was moving to a pre-planned escape route. The challenge was target identification in darkness. German tanks and American tanks had similar silhouettes at night. Friendly fire incidents were common enough that units developed recognition procedures. Tigers had distinctive features: the massive rectangular hull, the overlapping road wheels, the long gun barrel extending well forward of the hull. But at 50 yards in darkness, with adrenaline flooding your system, and the knowledge that firing at the wrong target meant killing your own troops, identification required nerve that training couldn't provide. Winter operations added another layer of complexity. December 1944 through February 1945 saw some of the coldest weather in European history. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. The bazooka's electrical firing system, powered by dry cell batteries, became unreliable in extreme cold. Batteries lost charge, contacts corroded, rockets failed to ignite. Troops learned to keep spare batteries inside their uniforms, using body heat to maintain charge. They learned to clean electrical contacts obsessively, because a failure to fire when you were 20 yards from a tiger meant certain death. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 put all these lessons to the test. German forces launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, spearheaded by SS Panzer divisions equipped with Tiger Is, and Panthers. American infantry units, many equipped only with bazookas for anti-tank defense, suddenly faced the Wehrmacht's heaviest armor in terrain that favored defenders. The village of Bastogne became famous for the 101st Airborne's defense, but dozens of smaller engagements along the German axis of advance involved infantry bazooka teams against armor. These engagements rarely made the historical record. No distinguished service crosses were awarded for the team that disabled a Tiger's track with a lucky shot, forcing the tank to withdraw. No silver stars for the men who held position in a burning building long enough to get one clear shot at a Panther's engine deck before the building collapsed. But collectively, these small actions created friction that operational plans couldn't account for. A disabled tank blocked a road, forcing the column behind it to halt or detour. A Tiger killed by a bazooka team meant its supporting infantry lost their mobile fortress, becoming vulnerable to American artillery. An attack delayed by 6 hours, because tank commanders had to clear buildings before advancing, meant reinforcements arrived, defensive positions strengthened, and tactical momentum evaporated. The German response to bazooka threats evolved throughout the war. By late 1944, most German armor operated with mandatory infantry escort. Panzer grenadiers would advance ahead of tanks, clearing potential ambush positions. This worked in open terrain but became impossible in urban combat, where every window, every cellar, every pile of rubble could hide a two-man bazooka team. German tank commanders also learned to avoid certain tactical situations entirely. Narrow streets became death traps. Villages with stone buildings provided too much concealment. Forests allowed infantry to approach within lethal range, but avoiding these terrains meant limiting operational flexibility. It meant accepting longer routes, slower advances, and giving American forces time to prepare defenses. The technical arms race between armor and anti-armor continued accelerating. The Tiger II, introduced in late 1944, featured frontal armor up to 7.1 inches thick. No American infantry anti-tank weapon could penetrate it frontally. But the Tiger II weighed 69 tons, strained Germany's industrial capacity to produce, and suffered from chronic mechanical unreliability. Only 492 were ever built, compared to 1,300 Tiger is. Meanwhile, American bazooka development produced the M20 Super Bazooka in 1945. This weapon fired a larger 3.5-inch rocket with penetration capability of 11 inches of armor. It could defeat any German tank from the side or rear, even the mighty Tiger II, but the M20 arrived too late for widespread use in the European theatre. The war ended before production reached sufficient scale. What killed the Tiger wasn't superior American weapons, it was mathematics. Germany produced approximately 1,300 Tiger Is and 500 Tiger IIs during the entire war. The United States produced 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks. The Soviet Union produced 58,034 tanks. For every Tiger destroyed by bazookas, artillery, air attack, or mechanical breakdown, there were still 10 Allied tanks to replace their losses. The tactical innovation that bazookas represented mattered not because they made Tigers obsolete, but because they made Tigers beatable. A weapon that infantry could carry, that required no vehicle support, that could engage armor at close range, transformed the psychological battlefield. Tank commanders who knew that infantry might be waiting in ambush had to advance cautiously. Caution meant slower advances. Slower advances meant more time for Allied forces to respond. By spring 1945, the question wasn't whether bazookas could kill Tigers, but whether any Tigers remained operational. German armor losses throughout 1944 had been catastrophic. The Normandy campaign alone cost the Wehrmacht hundreds of tanks destroyed or abandoned. The Soviet offensives in the east were grinding entire panzer divisions into wreckage. By April 1945, operational Tiger tanks were rare enough that encountering one was noteworthy. The final engagements told the story of a weapon system that had outlived its strategic utility. Individual Tigers could still dominate local battlefields. Their armor remained formidable. Their guns could still destroy Allied tanks at ranges where return fire was ineffective. But they couldn't be everywhere. They couldn't stop combined arms assaults supported by artillery and air power. They couldn't prevent American and Soviet forces from advancing across Germany. On April 30, 1945, Soviet forces captured the Reichstag in Berlin. Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. The war in Europe was entering its final week. Scattered German units still fought, including some equipped with Tigers, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The legacy of bazooka versus Tiger engagements wasn't found in statistics or kill ratios. It was found in the tactical lessons that would shape anti-tank warfare for the next 50 years. Infantry needed portable anti-tank weapons. Armor needed infantry support to survive in close terrain. Combined arms tactics, integrating armor, infantry, artillery, and air power, were essential for success. The men who fought with bazookas against Tigers understood a truth that doctrine manuals struggled to express. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to do mathematics under fire and accept the conclusion. If the tank was going to kill everyone, someone had to stop it. If the weapon available was inadequate, you used it anyway. If the probability of survival was low, you accepted that and moved forward. George Burns survived the war. He returned home, lived quietly in Florida, and died in March 1994 at age 76. His Distinguished Service Cross and Silver Star gathered dust in a drawer. He rarely spoke about Lucherberg or the Tigers he destroyed. When asked, he would say only that he did what needed doing, when it needed doing, because no one else was there to do it. The Tiger tanks he fought are gone now, melted for scrap or preserved in museums as relics of industrial warfare. The bazookas that killed them are similarly preserved, displayed beside the tanks they once hunted. The mathematical reality that made those encounters possible, that forced ordinary men to extraordinary actions, remains unchanged. When the situation demands it, when the alternative is unacceptable, humans will walk into fire carrying inadequate weapons and somehow, impossibly, prevail. That's not heroism. That's arithmetic. The brutal calculus of combat where every variable favors death, but the conclusion demands you advance anyway. Burns understood this. So did thousands of other infantry soldiers who carried bazookas, maneuvered to within lethal range of heavy armor, and fired knowing they might not survive the next 30 seconds. The hyperbolic stories, the exaggerated claims, the myth of bazookas as tiger killers, all missed the point. Bazookas didn't kill tigers because they were superior weapons. They killed tigers because men like Burns were willing to get close enough to make an inadequate weapon sufficient. Close enough to see the tank commander's face, close enough to hear the engine, close enough that missing meant dying. That distance, measured in yards and calculated in probability of survival, defined an entire generation's understanding of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the mathematical acceptance of necessary risk. The willingness to step into the street, shoulder the launcher, and fire at a 60-ton tank from 20 feet away, because the alternative was watching everyone behind you die. The title asks how one farmer's crazy bazooka tactic destroyed 12 tigers in 3 days with just 6 rockets. The truth is more complex and more human. George Burns wasn't a farmer. He was a sergeant who became a lieutenant. He didn't destroy 12 tigers. He destroyed 2, along with other tanks and vehicles. It didn't happen in 3 days. His engagements were months apart. And he didn't use 6 rockets. He used 13 during his 2 documented tiger kills alone. But the essential truth survives the hyperbole. A man with courage and a weapon that shouldn't have worked found ways to make it work anyway. He got close enough. He aimed true enough. He survived long enough. And 2 tiger tanks that were supposed to be invulnerable burned because one American soldier understood that impossibility is just another variable in the equation. And sometimes, with enough determination and a little luck, you can make the math work. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.